So when it comes to the legal process of doing a JV with the vendor, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. So obviously the first thing is that they're moving their land into an SPV with you. So they're going from being the sole owner of the property to then actually sharing ownership of that property with you. So there needs to be clear terms set out within a shareholders agreement as to the shares involved and who owns what and how that side of things is structured. They obviously need to be legally protected to ensure that if anything goes wrong, they're not going to lose everything. And actually that's where a really good solicitor and a really good accountant comes into play, because you need to make sure that their shareholding, if you didn't want them involved in the development finance, for example, you need to make sure that their shareholding is below 20% so that they don't have to sign any of the documents or anything like that. But they need to be protected to make sure that they're still getting, if their share is more than 20%, that they're still getting the share that they're due come the end of that. So that's the first thing you need to sort out, is actually the legals of the company structure moving into it to make sure that they're protected against the development finance and everything else. When it comes to actually structuring the security side of things, if they want a second charge, for example, you need to make sure the development finance lender is aware of that and that their solicitor is aware of that, and that there's a deed of priority, which essentially means that the development lender, who's the first charge, take priority over the second charge. There needs to be a deed between the two of those so that they work together to make sure that the vendor can't force a sale or anything like that. And that can be quite an intricate part of the legal process. And the last part that you sort of need to focus on within that legal process is actually how everyone's going to get out of it at the back end as well. And that may fall more on the accountant than the solicitor. It depends how you're structuring things. But there needs to be a way of saying, right, okay, well, come the end of this development, we will buy out the vendor for X amount and they will sell their shares back to us, or we're just going to close the SPV down if it's a sale. There's all sorts of things that you need to bear in mind throughout the latter part of that legal process and the sales process to make sure that everyone can get out of this deal as well as getting into it. Because if you're looking to retain the units as well, it can be very, very difficult if you're building 10 units, for example. If the vendor owns 20% of the company, you've paid the vendor their bit, but then they retain their 20%, you've then got to move those properties out of that company into another company, incurring stamp duty and other taxes and everything else, rather than just being able to say, well, look, we've paid the vendor their 100 grand or whatever it is, their shares are then relinquished and then you take over ownership of the company. So that is quite a complex legal structure that you've got to put in place in terms of making sure that there's that ability to bring the property in, do the development, and then sell it and obviously get them out of the back end. So definitely get a good solicitor. You need a very, very good solicitor for JVs with the vendor, and be prepared for a lot of the vendor solicitor telling them not to do it and telling them all the worries and everything else. So there needs to be a lot of management during that legal process to make sure that they're looked after and to make sure that they don't get cold feet at the 11th hour and then decide to move on. So a complex legal structure, complex legal process, but a good solicitor will get you through it with no issues whatsoever.